Hello and welcome to another edition of the Prosecutors Partners. I'm your host, King County Prosecuting Attorney Dan Satterberg, and on this show we introduce you to some of the people who are making a difference in our community in the area of justice. And today I'm so excited to have with us former King County Council member, former King County Executive, former Deputy Secretary. I'm getting tired of talking about your resume. We have Ron Sims with us. Ron, welcome.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
I'm glad that you remembered where the courthouse is. Now that you've been retired for a few years, you were able to come back here without a problem.
I had wonderful memories, and it was easy to find.
What was it like coming back today? What kind of memories come into your mind as you walk into the hallway?
Well, I got stopped downstairs, and by a lot of people who were still here, many near retirement. So it was like coming back to a homecoming.
Being able to see people. They're going to want a hug, right?
They get that hug. You know, I will always hug.
How did that start? Because you were hugging before it was cool to hug.
My father always hugged. He hugged everybody, and matter of fact, he didn't hug, he just squeezed, really squeezed. But my father said that Americans perfected handshakes in order not to hug each other. And so I've always hugged.
Father was a minister, James?
My father was a minister, and he just said that hugs require you to break down barriers. You break down the space between people, and there is a momentary nearness. And it's easier to get people to listen and talk. And a hug is a great sign of friendliness in most cases. I mean, there are hugs that are mean-spirited too, but for the most part, when you hug people, you're saying good morning, I like you, glad to see you, and that's why I hug.
So can you talk a little bit about what it was like to grow up as a son of a minister in Spokane? You were born in 1948, and you were a small child, an African-American boy in Spokane. What was that like?
You know, I think that it's harder on my parents. My parents were members of the American Democrat, the ADA at that time. And it was in very conservative space, and you had the McCarthy era. So my father came out of World War II where he served. He decided not to go back to New York, but to remain in Spokane because he was at that time called Geiger Air Force Base, and he decided to stay. And but he was well-educated. He went to Lincoln University. His roommate was Langston Hughes, and so he came out here to Spokane, and my mother was in disbelief because she always thought there would be this wonderful life they would have in New York and New Jersey. But they became active, and so their first activities were being politically active, but being on the wrong side of the McCarthy era. And then they became civil rights champions for years. And I remember that rather well. I remember a lot of good things and then a lot of harsh things.
As a young boy growing up, when did it first occur to you that there was racism in your hometown?
Fifth grade, I think more starkly than any other time. You don't sense it. You know there's some differences, but you don't know what they are. When we first moved out of Garden Springs, we moved into a Japanese neighborhood, so I thought everybody ate Japanese candy when we moved to a predominantly white neighborhood, and there were no Japanese candies at all. And that was kind of a culture shock for me because there wasn't anybody named Ueda or Honda or Mukai or Tanaka, all the people that I had grown up with prior to that time. And then it became very clear that race was going to be a barrier in regards to more parental attitudes than the kids' attitudes of their kids. You could see it in the parents' faces.
Not wanting their children to come play with you?
Oh, no, we could play with the kids, but it was, had to be out front. We had to be in a space where people could see. Where I learned it was at a Tupperware party. There was a Tupperware party in the neighborhood. My mother was getting dressed to go to the party, and the host told me to go tell my mother she couldn't come because the other ladies would be upset. Wow. So I walked in, my brother and I walked across the street, not knowing how to tell my mother she couldn't come to this Tupperware party. And we walked in the door, and we opened it, and she said, "You can't come." You could see in my mom's face, she knew exactly what happened. So her first was pain. She was being told by the neighborhood, "You're not invited." But then I think she saw our face, and she came over and hugged us, and I never forgot that. We were really hurt. Mm-hmm. That was our mom, and she was really courageous by just grabbing us and holding us, and letting us work through what just happened to us. We moved within a year and over to a much more diverse neighborhood called Grant School. But even in high school, I remember being my first day, I got lost, and then I was brought into the counselor's office and told I was a troublemaker. I hadn't done anything. I had actually gotten lost, and it wasn't my error, it was theirs, because they sent me to a room that didn't exist. So I was going to go, I just got here, and now I'm in trouble. So that was, I have really wonderful memories of some of the people at Lewis and Clark High School, some particular teachers that were my advocates, some students who are still my friends to this day. But it forced me to deal with the issues of race and disparity and people's attitudes and prejudices. And when I got to college, I was able to actually handle it much more maturely. And that's what you end up doing if you're an African American. You have these really, for people to say that people like me don't know, I want to say I know it well. The issue is don't let it define you. And my father used to say that you can be defined or define yourself. And he used to just say that again and again and again, because that's how he and my mother lived their lives. They were not going to let outside forces define or limit them. You define yourself, and if you accept the rules other people apply to you, then they have won. But you have to set your course, and you will have to fight for it and be strong and enduring. And I think that's what I try to do in my life.
Those are amazing lessons from parents, and it's unfortunate you have to give that lesson to your children, but it created expectations for you that you were going to go do great things.
It did. Well, we used to go to, my parents had a funny conversation at every anniversary, and I'll never forget their 50th anniversary. I had gone over, and my mother said to my dad, "James, when are we going back to civilization?" And my dad said, "Next year, Lydia," and they both laughed. So there was always this New Jersey in them. But that was a way I think they dealt with the life that they chose to live. I mean, I don't go back, I wouldn't want another life than the one I've had. It was, I have really fond memories of 1218 East 5th Avenue, Spokane, Washington, and, area code 509-535-3601. I mean, those are just burned into my system, because that was that number was my safety number. I could call at any time from college that number and know that my mom or dad was going to pick up the phone, and I could talk about my happiness or my disappointments, and I was going to get really good advice.
So at Central Washington University, you graduated with a degree in psychology.
Psychology, yeah.
What did you think you were going to do at that point?
I had no idea. I tried to delay graduation as long as I could, so I took an extra 9 credits over 1 year. So it was a 5th year graduate with 9 credits. My parents were going apoplectic, and so I finally, they just said, "You will leave now," and so I left, and I got a job in the Attorney General's office, Consumer Protection Division, and that was my start, because you wanted to know where you're going to work, and I came over here because I was following the first love of my life. I know what love is now. I know what it is like now to be head over heels every single day in love with somebody, but that first love has its own uniqueness and good times and funny. So I followed that person over to she to be a teacher and me to be whatever, and we broke up over here. And then
she got you over the mountains, and she got you at least
she did
into Olympia.
She got me. No, I worked for the Attorney General's office, then I worked for the Federal Trade Commission. I was an investigator, and I loved being an investigator. I love complex issues. I love problem solving. I love puzzles. I love thinking like a person who was a crook would think. And I was really good at it. So I could actually anticipate what to look for in files and find it, because I would say, if I were them, I would do this. I moved to antitrust, which is a lot of fun too. That is more of a not only looking at math, but looking at behavior, looking at market controls. And then I left and worked for the city of Seattle at a program where they work with juveniles, trying to keep kids from getting into the juvenile facilities, the detention facilities, and provide alternatives outside.
We're still trying to do that.
We're still trying to do that. And then I was fortunate enough to be hired by Senator George Fleming, who mentored me and put up with a lot. He mentored me. He really mentored me. He was a caucus chair of for the Democrats in the Washington State Senate, and he was amazing in every sense of the word. He was a great, demanding professor, friend, adult, parent, putting up with a pretty naive young man.
We all need mentors, and I had a great mentor in Norm Mailing, and George Fleming is somebody who was really a giant of a man during his time, and who had overcome racism and become a real leader here. What should people know about Senator Fleming that they don't know?
He has a great sense of humor. I think people realize that there is he was a football star, professional football. He's in the Rose Bowl Hall of Fame, UW Hall of Fame in football. I don't think people realize how the loss of his mother affected him. It drove him. He continued to want to please her. And he demanded that we follow that lead. I've never met her, but she had to be an amazing woman for him to be so committed to living the kind of life and engaging in the public service that he believed she wanted him to do. And so it requires all of us to have a hero of some kind. It really does. We go into our work and into our lives, and we don't create heroes. We don't. I believe that everybody needs a hero. Somebody they say, I want to be like that person. I want to be like my dad. I do. My dad was well-educated and smart. I'm not. But he was driven, and he was driven to be just and to be fair. He had a deep regard for faith, as I do. He was a person who people never saw anger of. Now, I don't think that would be said of me, but he always welcomed, always hugged, always had a smile, always had a glint in his eye. He had a hobby as being a master organist. You would never ask me to be a musician at all, at any time. But my wife points out to me that I have a substantial collection of music, and I still listen to not only symphony music, but I'll listen to classical organ music. And I thought I would never do that after hearing him practice for hours and hours and hours. But I love music, and that just reflects upon being well trained. I'm a proud African American. Somebody said to me, I should say that I am a county executive who happens to be black. And I said, really? So when I introduced myself, I said, I'm an African American who happens to be county exec. And because that's what my father taught me to be, proud of who I am as an African American, proud of our history, to be a good example, to continue to read about my history and understand the legacies that people left, to understand, and I did. And I said to my dad when he was passing away, and he was really sick, and we knew he was going to leave. So I said, Dad, you're the greatest man I ever knew. And he said, no, I'm not. Your grandfather was the greatest man you ever knew. So I know I've had two great men in my life.
And you're standing on the shoulders of those who came before you, and
I want to make them proud.
Yeah. So Senator Fleming and the whole Olympia legislative experience, did that light some fire in you that said maybe I could be elected someday?
Well, here's what actually happened. I had run for office and lost to King County Councilmember Ruby Chow, and so I was out of a job. And so Seattle City Council member Sam Smith, who was the dean of African American electeds, called Senator Fleming and said, I want you to hire this young man. So he saw something in me I didn't see at the time in myself. I thought, wow, I've lost, and what am I going to do next? And I went to Olympia, and Senator Fleming provided me the kind of training you need. How do you work with other people who you disagree with? How to stand up for things that you want to believe in, how to be exhaustive and work hard, to learn what you had to put up with to succeed, to learn when to push and when to pull back, how not to give up your integrity. That was the big one. He said, you're not for sale, don't ever be for sale. And
which is not a lesson that everyone in Olympia followed. But
for African American electeds, it's important. I tell, even when I was back in Washington, D.C., I'd meet with younger African American electeds in cities, and I would say to them, I tell the story I use is the the last person who was ever bought in my family was my great-great-grandfather.
Oh.
And so they knew exactly what I was talking about. You're not for sale anymore. Your integrity is what you own, and don't give it up. Some actually didn't listen to me, but many others, I think, and even when I go out now, people say to me, I remember when you said, so when I travel the country now, so I feel really good about being kind of a preacher on that point. You know, I love life. I love being well trained, well supported, well taught, and I enjoyed my career in Olympia. It was great tutoring. On the county council, I met some really wonderful people. Bruce Lang, who
One thing, I wanted to talk about this little pin that I'm wearing is the legacy of that relationship you had with Bruce Lang. Can you tell us about renaming the county in honor of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.?
Sure. There was a person named Shelby Skates who used to write a column for the Seattle PI, and every Martin Luther King Day, whenever it came up, he would say, "Why don't we rename King County after Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King?"
Because King County had been named after
Rufus DeVane King, who was actually a holder of slaves.
Yes.
And
and he was also the vice president for Franklin Pierce for 6 months.
He died of pneumonia.
Yes.
And
not a very inspirational character.
He wasn't. He was it had gone 59 rounds or something like that in trying to select a candidate. So he was he represented the pro-slavery group, and so in order to get the ticket together, they had to concede the support of slavery. So Bruce Lang walks down the hall and says, "I think we should do this," and gives it to me and walks away. And so I walked back down the hall and said, "Are you kidding me?" He says, "No, we should rename King County. We should do this." Now, Bruce was one of those, he was a Republican. He had studied for a while to be a priest, and if there was a Hall of Fame for decent, responsible, caring, loving, supportive public officials, he would be in that Hall of Fame. He was remarkable.
Why isn't there a Hall of Fame?
I don't know.
We should build one.
There are people who have served, who are emblematic of what you want to see in a public official. You were mentored by one in Norm Mailing. I mean, you look back on this list, and there were some pretty amazing people who made a decision they had all kinds of choices they could have made, and yet they decided to be in public service. And Bruce is one of those people. I'm very fond of him. I hold him in very high regard. But he came down and said, so I did the first motion, and he said, "I don't like it because you're just complaining about Rufus DeVane King." So I rewrote the whole motion to applaud Dr. King. And it was really interesting. There was a split on the council, 4-4. And I needed a fifth vote. And the person I least expected to give me the fifth vote for a vote, we were sitting there scheduling the vote. And King County Councilmember Bob Grieve from West Seattle said to me, "I'm going to go on vacation for 2 weeks, but if you wait 2 weeks, I think you'll have 5 votes." So
He was the fifth?
He was the fifth vote, and it passed because King County Councilmember Bob Grieve wanted, for whatever reasons, to support that, and he did.
Those of us who work in the county now, we think this is such an obvious, inspirational namesake. We can't imagine why anybody would vote against it in favor of Rufus DeVane King. What did the opponents say?
I had no idea. The DeVane family actually came to one of our hearings and kind of tried to very nicely explain to us why he shouldn't be dishonored with the name change. But they couldn't overcome the librarian in Selma, Alabama, I called, because Selma's where Rufus DeVane King had his property and where he came from. I called her on the phone, and she was an African American. I could tell by her voice, and I introduced myself, and I said, "I'm from King County, Washington." And she said, yeah. And I said, "We're going to change the name of our county, who's presently named after Rufus DeVane King. We're going to change it to Dr. Martin Luther King." She said, "You're going to what?" So I told her, she says, "What do you need?" And she sent me tons of information because I think to her, having Dr. King honored was really important. And so I think about her now. Remember when I called her back and said, "We did it, we did it, we did it." And you could just hear this kind of, I don't know, to her it was both appreciation but a deep felt something about doing that, honoring him. And Selma, Alabama meant a lot to her personally, and you could feel it on the phone. But it was wonderful. It was great doing it. And then we chose then my neighbor, Senator Adam Klein, introduced the bill to rename it on the state side for a very, very long time. And then it passed, and we had a big ceremony here.
I remember I was here.
And Governor Gregoire, who I'd run against for governor, came to make the announcement. And somebody told me that I said I had introduced her as my governor because she'd won, I'd moved on, and everybody said she was so struck by that introduction. And I was glad she came up here to do the signing. And I'm glad she signed it. I'm glad the legislature adopted it after all those years. And you look back on things and say, if I learned any lesson in life, you may be told no once. You may be told no twice. You may be told no 100 times. But could things take time to mature, but good things can be enduring, and the moment will come, and you have to be patient and persevering, but the moment will come.
You have many things that can be your legacy here in King County that are big physical things like bright water plants and metro and all that. But I'll have to tell you, as a current employee of King County, knowing that we're named in honor of Dr. King is a huge thing. It's not just a mascot. This is an inspiration. And when we talk about reform in the criminal justice system, we think, how can we build a system that Dr. King would be proud of? And that's a challenge that you wouldn't get with this Alabama slaveholder that we used to be named after.
We wouldn't, but I look back and, you're being modest about your role, Norm Maling's role, the role of the Superior Court here that was stunning and supportive. When I was back in Washington, D.C., we had a meeting. The Justice Department wanted to know how to get in front of the issues of who goes to jail. And so I said to them, I think you should take a good look at King County, whose populations for detention at the juvenile level are really low, and the jail population has changed dramatically. So they came to my office and met with me and said, well, we're curious about, can you give me some history? And I said, yeah, I can remember when I was being asked to build a second juvenile detention facility and a third jail. Right. And I said no. And I had a lot of support by the prosecutor, had a lot of support by the judges of saying, no, let's try something else. Let's look at alternatives. When I'll never forget the event. It was really, really packed. And I was asked to attend but not say anything, which was really, I was happy about. But they had these experts up there, and King County was lauded as being the most successful jurisdiction with a juvenile and adult jail at reducing its populations, and on top of that, having a crime rate that was one of the lowest in the country. We always called it was the crime rate of the 1951 period. So is there more to be done? The answer is yes, but this county has a great deal to be proud of on something that nobody else in the country has been able to replicate, but now wish to follow because King County broke. They challenged them. This government challenged itself, and really wonderful things happened. Even the Republicans supported, and Chris Vance, who was on the council, said to me, we thought you were going to fail so badly this could be used against you, but when you succeeded, we could take credit. Yeah. And we both laugh over that. But you're surprised at what people will do. It may not be in the best of interest, but they can do good things one way or another.
Well, there was a time during your administration as executive when we had purchased property over in Bellevue. That was going to be our third jail, and when we had 4 or 5 times as many young people in juvenile detention, and we didn't see a way to end that. But somehow, through your leadership, through cooperation with all of the players, we've been able to get where we are today.
There's a phrase called "seize the moment," and for whatever reason, people were prepared to seize the moment. And I think that's what King County government does and has always done. Whenever the opportunity presented itself to do amazing things. King County government did it. I gave a speech once up in Vancouver, Canada. It got reported in the paper. I said, we're going to buy 100,000 acres of forest lands and protect them in perpetuity. I came back and my staff said, you said, what? We read this. And I said, I think you have the talent and skills to do that. When I left here, we had acquired 192,000 forest acres in perpetuity. Amazing. And I think that is letting smart people be smart, talented people to move forward, having the support of the prosecutor's office, the county council, our finance people, and having land available and having people fervent about accomplishing that task. And I think that if there's anything, I wish we were in a period now of expectation, of high expectation, where we could all of a sudden realize, as my father's a Lincoln University graduate felt, you set the standards high so that people will meet them, because there's always a higher standard. I would hope that, and I think here in this area, we still have people demanding the impossible to be done, and to attempt to be as perfect as we can. And I like the aspirational culture of this area. It has served us very well and will serve us very well for several generations to come.
And that was your job, to be a visionary too, and to go say crazy things in a speech and then come back and tell staff, just make it work.
I used to drive them nuts. I could tell. I could see it on their faces, and I would say, but smart people will take a risk. The issue was me not to tell them how to do that. I just said, give me a pathway, and there was never a single tool. There were a variety of ways and approaches, but it worked out really, really well. I still smile about it. I mean, when I met President Obama, when he was President-elect Obama, in Chicago, he said, I flew over your area, and I just was stunned about how well organized it looked. You had these huge, beautiful green spaces. You had these lakes and rivers. You had farms, and then you had small cities, and then all of a sudden you had a large urban area, and it just seemed so well organized. And I was told you had some part of that. I said, no, my staff had a lot of parts of that, and they did a remarkable job. It wasn't me. I just did what I was told. That was the law. I said, this is what I would, can we do this? And the staff did it. We had cooperation from the cities, other counties. The business community was very, very helpful. Environmental activists were, stunning and, doing things urgently. People were innovative.
It's almost like we managed growth on purpose, intentional.
I remember, though, a conversation that I had with one of the staff in your office when I said, how would you unwind this? We had preserved all of this acreage, and I said, how would you unwind it? They said, what's really, considering the mechanisms we bought with, would be impossible.
Is there a weakness somewhere?
And I said, can we find how you would unwind it? And we found out if you put it in a charter amendment and it passed, it would be preserved in perpetuity. And what I liked about that is being able to say, how would you stop an idea, or how would you retreat from it, and realizing you just put it in the county's constitution, require 2/3 vote to change that charter.
And Olympia can't mess with it, Washington, D.C. can't mess with it, and so on.
And we look at it now and say, why would anybody want to chop down the forest today? But there were people willing to do that, and now we realize that those forests are very necessary. There's going to be climate change, and you need those forests. It's important for the variety of species that we have here to sustain them. It provides us water sources for the salmon that we're trying to recover here. And it polls, evidently, in everybody's polls, as the number one thing that people think about when they want to work here, which is, wow, it looks really green and lush. But that was an issue of your office, not just dismissing me, which they could have easily done, but saying, everybody thinking we're perfect, and the answer is, we're not yet perfect. And I think that is a role when you look at a collaborative government of having every party in it move to a goal. The prosecutor's office here on the civil and the criminal side is well regarded for doing that. The county council is well regarded for doing that. The executive is, which makes this government, getting all kinds of awards all of the time. Why people say, if they can do it, you can too. And so now other governments are trying to replicate what we do here. But it's personalities, it's elected officials, it is the depth of talent in every single employee here. They all do their work. It brings a smile to my face and really warm memories because we were really collaborative. Even when we had differences, people tried to find that point of intersection to get things done. It was great.
No, I want to fast forward a minute. When you left the county, you had this meeting with President Obama, and he asked you to do something, and
he did.
You can tell us about that meeting.
Well, actually, it was an interesting story. I got a call in my office, and my staffer said, "Well, the presidential search committee is on the phone." And I said, "No, it's a reporter asking me, do I want to run for a fourth term?" So they gave me the phone, and I hung up. And then they called right back. And I said to my staff, "Can you give me the security and have security clear this? Because I want to know if this is real." And it ended up being real. So I talked to them for about 45 minutes. And my goal was not to leave here. My goal was to tell them all of the areas that were affecting metropolitan areas and the various positions in the federal government that, if they worked collaboratively, could make our work much easier. I said it'd be nice to have the federal government as a friend. And so the person said, fine. And then about a week later, they called me and said, can you come back and brief staff? So I said, sure. So I asked my staff to give me as many briefing books as they can, and they gave me a really thick binder of, you name the topic. I was mastering proficiency. So I go back to Chicago, and then they put you through a lot of searches and stuff like that. You go up to the 31st floor, which is where his office was when he was was the president-elect. So I go up there, and I'm sitting in a room, right? And I have my briefing book, and I'm just going through that briefing book. And then all of a sudden, President-elect Obama comes in and he says, and I was starstruck. I won't lie. I was. Oh my God, this is President of the United States. Woo, wow. So he says, come on. So I'm thinking he's going to take me back to this star chamber of intellects who would just tear me apart, which I was prepared for. But instead, he walks to his office. But I get to the area where the door is, but I don't walk into his office. And he's walking in, because I don't know where I'm supposed to sit. So I just stand there. He says, oh, no, come and sit down. So I make a movement, but no commitment. He turns around and says, sit anywhere. I promise you I will not sit in your lap. So I sit down, and I'm on a sofa, and he comes down, he sits right next to me, right? So we talk a lot for about 40 minutes. And then he says to me, if I tell you that I want you to work for me, what will you say? And I said, Mr. President, has anybody told you no? And he said, I don't know, has anybody told me no? I said, Mr. President, I will work for you. And my life changed. I called my wife and said, I just made a career change, dear, so you should know that. I told the president yes. She was ecstatic. When I got confirmed by the Senate, I came back to Seattle, and my father had passed away. My mother was in the care of in somebody's home because she had lost her sight. So I sat next to my mom, and I said, Mom, we have a black president. My mom says, I'm so proud of that black president, because she knew that President Obama was black. She was so proud. It was their civil rights dream come true. Mm-hmm. And I said, Mom, President Obama asked me to work for him, and I said, yes. Is that okay with you? She cried.
You probably did too. That's a powerful moment. Let me ask you, because you were Deputy Secretary of Housing and Urban Development.
Yeah.
To me, that's one of those super important federal agencies that we don't really know very much about. What was it about HUD that made you think, yeah, this is what I want to do?
Well, I didn't have a choice. When they call you back up and tell you where you're going to go, it's fine. But I actually found HUD intriguing. One is because I had to deal with them. HUD is probably very multifaceted. We see them as who gives you community development block grants. Their major business is FHA insurance, so people pay that insurance premium in order to buy a home. But they also give a lot of money in two different ways to housing authorities. They give money to private enterprises that can build housing through tax credit systems. They do a lot of work on cleaning up toxic sites. There were 81 offices in HUD around the country, and they have ones in small towns, rural areas. So you get a variety of inputs as to what works, and you realize that many times you have to work out agreements with federal, for instance, the farmer's home, because there's a line that gets drawn on the community. You have on one side it's your insurance, on the other side it's their insurance. There were two people, we call ourselves co-conspirators, who were deputy secretaries of transportation and of EPA, and the idea was to dissolve our silos because there was a lot of running into each other, and the idea was that we would resolve very quickly tasks to be done, normally trying to do it way ahead of time. But people don't realize that it's not a single urban area or small town in the United States that is not impacted by HUD.
And it's a matter of for a lot of people, equity and social justice. But low-income housing, huge issue here in Seattle still and around the country. And
yeah, we have a very tough law. It's a civil rights law. It's called Affirmatively Furthering for Housing. It's a stupid name for it. I mean, I wish we could make it shorter, but it basically means that every jurisdiction has an obligation to desegregate. Seattle was one of the ones that did not. Seattle was segregated for a long time, and if you look at it demographically, probably still is. And the idea, so we didn't know why, and communities of color didn't want to move. So after several years of study, the rules said that cities had an obligation to provide opportunities for people to move into, for people of color to move into neighborhoods that were predominantly white. But it also said restore the neighborhoods that people of color are in so people want to move into them. So it was a much different strategy that's working out very, very effectively. It basically says to cities all over the country, you can meet your civil rights obligation by paying attention to the neighborhoods who you've ignored for a very long time, by putting in parks and playgrounds and wider sidewalks and street lights and community gardens and better housing opportunities and wider streets and boulevards. Make them look like the communities that are affluent. And we know for a number of reasons that communities of color thrive in those neighborhoods, but those neighborhoods are also integrating themselves. North Beacon Hill is the prime example of what happens. You put in a good school, it's an immersion school, and all of a sudden people who were not even going to think about going and moving into the South End moved into the North Beacon Hill area. It has changed, and people say it's gentrification. I look and say people saw a good school and they moved into a neighborhood where you had to live in a neighborhood to go to that school. And the key is to have more schools like that, not fewer, so that we can have a fuller range of integration. But HUD was, people don't realize, the budget is $44 billion a year annualized. And it has an incredible amount of data on population trends and opportunities and economic growth. And our job was to make the housing side in particular viable, whether it was for people who were of no income, people who were homeless, people who had lost their housing because of the crash, people who were coming back into the workforce. There was just a range, and we had to deal with it, so there was no dull day in HUD. You could not walk out and say, wow, this is a boring job.
Well, we've solved all these problems.
Oh, you could never solve them because they were, the people impacted were millions of people. And you were talking about working with the other agencies at that time at the behest and the request of the president to rebuild America, because we had the crash, and it had a far greater impact than people have ever described on lives and people's attitudes. So it wasn't just putting the money out there. You had to tell people how to access it, walk them through that, restore their confidence and their faith. You had to work with employers. You had to work with people who were building housing. You had to look at how people could buy a house, where you would locate incentives and invention. I used to say, if you do the same thing all the time, then you're making a mistake. So we had some we had a really remarkable group of assistant secretaries who began to think way outside the box, and that changed a lot of what HUD did because they had expertise in a field, but they knew how to make it innovative. And an idea was how could they talk to each other and integrate it, and we accomplished that as well. Other agencies began to replicate us by saying that internally you have silos, why don't we dissolve those? And then between the units of government, we had silos as well. And the idea was to dissolve them and create common interest, and we did that.
You've always been a believer in the role of government to improve the lives of people.
Yes.
I don't mean to bring you down at all, but we're in the first year of the Trump administration, and some of the people in that administration appear to see government as the enemy. And I just wondered, what was your reaction when you saw Dr. Ben Carson appointed to lead the agency that you put so much of your passion into?
Dr. Carson is very, very smart. He wouldn't be in that field if he wasn't. And my hope is that as he's able to fill his agency with people, he's going to bring in other smart people and he's going to listen to them so that he will be, as every surgeon is, very reluctant to make a change or to orchestrate a change without knowing a lot, so that my sense would be HUD will be less embroiled in some of the changes that are happening in other agencies, because that is not his nature. There was a professor who used to work for HUD, he's from USC, he sat down and talked to Dr. Carson about what we call the affirmative furthering fair housing rule. Dr. Carson had written a letter complaining it being social engineering. After that letter, that briefing that was done, he understood the fact that the rule had changed so that we had money moving into poorer communities and wealthier communities so that people had access to either. And he understood that. So I don't know how he's going to react in the long run. If you were to ask me, though, can you run government like a business? I tell people, I've heard that so long. There's pieces of it you can. The finance side, you can run it like a business, and it is run like a business, quite frankly, because you're talking about investments, dollars and cents, and credit ratings.
But we're not for profit.
We're not for profit. Government's responsibilities and why we created governments is to serve. To serve. And it's not to serve in a way that tells people, no, it is to serve what we call the aspirations of a society and the people who are in it. And I believe that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be smart about it and methodical about it and professional about it. But government isn't in it for a profit and loss. It is in there for the ultimate purpose of serving someone else's welfare and to doing it well. I have 5 grandchildren. What do I want them to be safe. I really do. I'm not going to arrest anybody, but the police can arrest bad people. I want people to be given chances. That's what judges do. That's what detention policies are. I want a public health system that works. I want the right to vote so that I can vote for the people that I care for. I want to be able to ride public transportation. I don't want to see sewage in my water. I want water that I can drink. I want stop signs and stoplights to work. I want crosswalks. I want my streets repaired. I want my sidewalks taken care of. That's what government does. It doesn't weigh up whether or not putting up a stop sign is an issue of profit or loss. It's safety. And so when I hear people say we're going to run it like a business, I'm appalled because you don't run government like a business. You can't do government like a business. Our idea is not is the best. Is there a high rate of return on people who are poor? The answer is no, but we serve them anyway because they're citizens, and our goal is in the long run we can make some alter the changes in their life, which will also affect their children and people around them, and in the end, people will generally be in a better place. But this, trying to put a return on investment on human beings and society appalls me. It's so wrong. Can you do that with clean air and clean water? Can you do that with having your garbage picked up every single day? All of us want that. Can recycling materials, is something wrong with that? The answer is that government is to serve the angel in us.
So is that your toolkit to get through the next 4 years? It's the fundamental faith in government and the goodness of people?
My parents' life was rougher than mine. And my grandparents' lives were rougher than my parents' lives. And they endured as shall I, as shall my grandkids.
Very good. Ron Sims, it's been wonderful to have you here on this edition of the Prosecutors Partners. And great to get a Ron Sims hug. We'll get another one on the way out. Tune in next time for another edition of the Prosecutors Partners, where you're going to meet some of the people who are making a difference for justice in our community. I'm your host, Dan Satterberg. Thanks for joining us.